Well, it's illegal now to buy or sell certain semi-automatic guns and certain magazine capacities in the state of Illinois. Good morning. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. We'll open up the phone lines all morning long for you to sound off. Of course, we've got a ton to get to, including the council roundup in the 7 o'clock hour. We'll review some of last night's Springfield City Council meeting, so we'll take a break from talking about gun control to instead talking about the Springfield City Council. But between now and then, also in the 8 o'clock hour, we will be taking your calls about the measure that bans semi-automatic weapons and certain magazines that the governor signed yesterday. We'll hear a lot from what the governor had to say yesterday at the signing ceremony. He talked about enforcement. He talked about the constitutionality he believes that it'll stand up against. But also talking about the national picture, seeming to talk of how he wants to get with other governors across the country and other lawmakers from across the country to ban certain types of semi-automatic weapons and maybe create a national registry of sorts. So the governor seems pretty ambitious. Some people already hinting that it could be a move to have the governor run for president. So that's been speculated for a while. Does this just add to a possible presidential platform for Governor JB Pritzker? So these are just some of the issues that are in front of constituents right now here in the state of Illinois, especially those of you who own firearms. So a lot to get to, including conversations with Guns Save Life founder John Bach, also Dan Eldridge from Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, groups that have promised to file a lawsuit. So a lawsuit is coming, and we will be covering this all the way to the Supreme Court and beyond here with Springfield's Morning News. And you can follow along with me. I'm Greg Bishop. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Just search Bishop on Air, and we can connect that way. So yesterday, the House, they took up the measure to essentially ban certain types of semi-automatic guns. And there was some good debate on the House floor. But before we actually saw what happened on the House floor with the debate of the Senate package that passed the day before, you had an interesting happening with the gun control group, GPAC. They prematurely fired off a message announcing that the gun bill had passed the General Assembly. And they hadn't even taken it up yet. So they put out their statement, and they did eventually apologize for moving too quick here and putting out that statement. So it was interesting to see that yesterday. But you also had the Illinois House Speaker, Emmanuel Chris Welch. He opened up the debate last night with the kind of an overview of sorts of what exactly is going on with this particular bill and what it does. And here's Emmanuel Chris Welch.
Immediately ends the sale, delivery, and purchase of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. This legislation includes a comprehensive, detailed, and updated list of assault weapons subject to the ban. High-capacity magazines are also prohibited. It strengthens assault weapons ban by also allowing the Illinois State Police to update the list as needed. Those already owning guns on the assault weapons list would have to provide information to the Illinois State Police. Immediately bans the possession and use of rapid fire devices that increase the firing rate of semi-automatic weapons. That's something we should really be proud of. That's historic. Expedites the implementation of universal background checks and does not change the FOID card age. I can't say it enough. I want to thank Representative Bob Morgan for the work he put in on this.
So the bill really has evolved quite a bit from when Bob Morgan proposed it months ago. He had a measure that would have capped the magazine capacity at 10 for all guns. And he also had a list that some said was outdated of what they were trying to define as assault weapons. So that iteration was changed in another House bill that upped the magazine capacity to 12, lowered some of the criminal penalties for having magazines. But then when it got to the Senate reworked the whole thing, added some more language, clarified which guns would be on this list, and then bumped the magazine capacities from 12 to 10 for long guns and 15 for handguns. So that's ultimately what passed the House and Senate on the final day of lame duck session, but not without some debate and continued debate here. Here is State Representative Patrick Windhorst, Republican from downstate, from the metropolis area. He addressed the concerns that people have about this legislation and where it's exactly heading at now ultimately signed by Governor JB Pritzker.
Everyone in this chamber is concerned about gun violence. Everyone in this chamber is concerned about violent crime and reducing violent crime. This bill is not going to reduce violent crime. The people who break the law, the people who commit violent crime, are not going to register their firearms, are not going to turn in their magazines. This will not stop that crime. What will happen is law-abiding gun owners will be yet again impacted by laws from this General Assembly, and yet again have their Second Amendment rights restrained. We have constitutional rights in our country. They protect our freedoms from the government. They are not rights that are given to us by the government. They protect rights that are sometimes unpopular. We protect the freedom of speech because sometimes speech isn't popular. We protect the freedom of religion because sometimes there are religions that aren't popular. We protect the press because sometimes the press isn't popular. We have these rights that are given to us. We see that in the Declaration of Independence, and we have that in the Constitution, and we should support, protect, and defend our constitutional rights. This bill violates those rights, will not reduce violent crime, and I ask for a no vote.
So several lawmakers got up to speak about the constitutionality of it and saying that it violated the Constitution. You had some supporters of the measure get up and say this is just one step. They say that much more needs to be done, including Democratic State Representative Denise Stoneback. She talked about how she wants to fingerprint gun owners, and that's an effort that's been underway for quite some time. But I do want to stop and listen to Blaine Willhauer. He is also a downstate state representative, part of the so-called Freedom Caucus, and he laid out his opposition. Here's about 2.5 minutes worth of Blaine Willhauer criticizing the bill and ultimately saying that he and others are not going to comply. Here is Representative Willhauer on the House floor yesterday.
Now, I know that a lot of you guys over there despise our founders and you casually cast aside the principles that this country was founded on. But our founding fathers, they knew what they were doing. See, they had experienced the tyranny of the majority, and they vowed that was never going to happen in our country. They said never again will an all-powerful central government come in and crush our individual rights and our individual liberty. That's what the Constitution's about, protecting our citizens from a government that oversteps and encroaches on our freedoms. We are the greatest and most just country in the history of the world because we have always understood that our power and our destiny is in the freedom of our citizens, not an authoritative government. Our Constitution ensures that. Its amendments protect the delicate balance between the citizens and government. It's designed to ensure balance and put a check on a government that's willing to run roughshod over its people. Now, over the past few years, your party has proven its willingness to advance an agenda at the expense of the freedom and the well-being of the citizens of this state. We have lived out the consequences of a government with no check on its power. We all felt what happened during COVID when this body and Governor Pritzker took advantage of a crisis. You trampled our freedom. You used our children as pawns to perpetuate your political power, destroyed their education, destroyed our economy, and you left behind an entire generation. Never again will we allow our Constitution and our freedoms to be shredded by your political agenda. We don't trust you. Too many citizens in this state don't trust you. A government unchecked, a government willing to defy our Constitution is a government that is completely out of control. So you can sit here and dictate whatever you want today. Maybe the political winds are in your favor here today, but I can tell you that we will not comply, and you're not going to do a darn thing about it, because the law, the Constitution, and the founding principles are on our side.
So State Representative Blaine Willhauer telegraphing that he and others plan on not complying. Governor JB Pritzker reacting to that after he signed the measure last night at about 8 o'clock. After several speakers, he sat down, signed the bill, and then took questions. And this was one of the first questions, is how exactly do you plan on enforcing this? We'll get to that next year with some of your reaction. And also later on, we'll talk with John Bach from Gun Save Life. It's here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk, now at 6:22. Let's take a look at Springfield's dependable 5-day forecast, where today it's going to be another mild day for the
News with Greg Bishop, weekdays 6 till 9 on 92.7 WMAY.
So Governor JB Pritzker yesterday signing the weapons ban, the measure that bans the future sale of certain semi-automatic weapons. And if you're joining us just now, this happened last night after the House passed the Senate version of the bill, and the governor promising he would sign it immediately. And then, after having been engrossed and printed out and spell checked and all of that, got out, and the governor ultimately took to a news conference on the second floor of the Capitol, just outside of the governor's office, and he proceeded to sign that measure, and also taking some questions afterwards. But here is, of course, Governor JB Pritzker holding up the bill and standing alongside various legislative leaders after signing it, and hugging those who have been advocating for the passage of this measure. But Governor JB Pritzker taking some questions, and one of the first questions was, how are you going to enforce this, especially with you've got even state lawmakers saying that they are not going to comply with this law. They are not going to register their firearms. Here is Governor JB Pritzker reacting to that proposition.
Well, you don't get to choose which laws you comply with in the state of Illinois. Let's be clear. The fact is that, yes, there are, of course, people who are trying to politically grandstand, who want to make a name for themselves by claiming that they will not comply. But the reality is that the state police is responsible for enforcement, as are all law enforcement all across this state. And they will, in fact, do their job, or they won't be in their job. Well, remember that anybody who doesn't comply, there are consequences for that. So, you know, we've given people, I think, a year. We're at about a year, right, for people to comply, to fill out the paperwork and so on, and we expect them to do that.
So Governor JB Pritzker also talking about the constitutionality of this. That was something else that was raised as a concern, especially with gun rights advocates promising a lawsuit. And he says that he believes it's constitutional. He also had Representative Bob Morgan, who led this effort in the House, to get up to address that particular question. Here is Governor JB Pritzker, followed by State Representative Bob Morgan from last night after the bill signing.
Well, I think frankly, that the Senate president was simply acknowledging what all of the Republicans seem to have been saying, and certainly the NRA and the other groups that were opposed to this, that they're going to try to take this to court. So, you know, my reaction, of course, is this is a constitutional bill. The law here that we now have enacted is constitutional. There was a lot of thought that went into it to make sure that it would be. And obviously, things will go through the courts and they'll make their determinations, but I feel very confident.
The constitutional interpretation of the Second Amendment, of course, loomed large over the drafting of this legislation. Both chambers took that very seriously. We have to make sure that we're passing laws that will withstand scrutiny. So we took those things into account. And of course, there were a lot of legal threats that came, and we look forward to being able to make our arguments in court.
And expecting those legal threats to turn into lawsuits in the very near future. You've got lawsuits that could be coming from all kinds of places. The Illinois State Rifle Association already said challenge accepted. We'll see you in court. You've got even Gun Save Life, who we're going to talk with coming up here in just a moment about the possibility of lawsuits, and the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois. I talked with Dan Eldridge yesterday. We'll share some of that conversation as well. Stay tuned. A ton more coming up here with Springfield's Morning News. But of course, I love getting your phone calls live and local at 217-629-7970. We'll take one before the news break. Good morning.
I just wanted to call in and say thank you to Doris Turner for standing up for her constituents in her part of the state.
She
As
voted
a Democrat,
against it.
For her to go against the party, she is going to feel it for a while in this state. Thank you very much, Doris.
Appreciate the call. And there were other downstate Democrats, especially in the House, that voted against this as well. And that was kind of anticipated, that there were going to be those who were in more rural areas not willing to go along with this. Regardless, though, the majority of lawmakers in both the House and Senate approved it, and the governor signed it. So that's what we're dealing with right now this morning with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. I'm Greg.